one of the things for me as I was moving from evangelicalism into the Anglican tradition was I was looking around at culture, and this is not unique to me. I have a lot of friends who have experienced the same thing, but I was looking around at kind of the culture in the West and seeing this kind of relativism and confusion and all sorts of things just kind of taking place. And for me, the first thing was I need roots. Like where are roots? I need something solid with roots. And what I found is in a lot of these evangelical contexts that don't have this sacramental worldview or this connection, intentional connection at least, to the ancient church, there does seem to be a susceptibility to kind of being driven and tossed by the winds of culture. And even in the way, I think we were talking about this earlier, I think it's important to bring up, liturgy is inherently bringing about this kind of order and a recognition of the order of God, and paying attention through scripture that God has an order in the way that he does things. And we're trying to mirror the heavenly worship through our liturgies. And so our cues are being taken from scripture, from the liturgical practices throughout scripture and throughout the church history. Whereas a lot of modern churches kind of take their cues from culture, where you have buildings that architecturally begin to look more like concert halls, and worship services that begin to look more like motivational speeches. And you have these things, and you have to kind of ask the question, like, where are these things rooting their identity in terms of liturgy? Who are they taking their cues from when it comes to how their liturgies are being structured? And so I think if you are watching this or listening to this and you're looking for something with roots, that is not driven and tossed by culture, and I'm not saying as a blanket statement there are plenty of faithful evangelical churches out there, but I am saying that the susceptibility to be tossed around, I think, is a lot higher in churches that uh, get their cues for forming their liturgy around culture and the movements of culture rather than the historic consensus of the church. And I think when we root ourselves there, not only do we root ourselves into something that has an inherent stability, but we also root ourselves in something that has a historic consistency that has transcended the movements of various cultures, the rise and fall of Rome, all of these different things transcended and moved through. And so there is an assurance, I think, that comes with that is very beautiful and very helpful, and will offer a lot of restless Christians the kind of security that they're looking for. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the struggle in modern day is to be shaped by culture. Um, and one of the safeguards of liturgy, if you will, is it in some way, shape, or form prevents us from being shaped by culture. It roots us in a historic way of worshiping. It roots us in a historic way of praying. And so even if the clergy who is leading it have a tendency or propensity for a certain type of theology, the liturgy still stands still. It still holds
Right.
fast, right? And so in some ways it even sort of safeguards the clergy, and that's kind of a beautiful aspect of it. But again, to go back to James K. Smith, where a liturgy doesn't exist, we will create one. And what is
Mm.
going to shape the liturgy that we have, right? Is it going to be something that's rooted historically in scripture and the tradition that's handed down that scripture and given us the word? Or is it going to be rooted in whatever the culture looks like? And this is where ultimately, depending on which stream you find yourself predominantly in, it's not only going to shape how you worship, but it's also going to shape things like your practice and your prayer life. It'll shape the way you interact with the church. It'll shape ultimately your views of art and
Mm-hmm.
architecture and things of that nature. All of that is shaped by the sort of liturgical structure and the culture that you're in. And so
Yeah.
I think liturgy serves this responsibility of doing two things. One is being firmly rooted in the past so that it feels ancient. It feels like it's rooted in the faith. It feels like it's rooted in something old and is firmly rooted in the saints, while also being contextual in the sense that, like, this is exactly what Cranmer got to, right? Is the liturgy serves no purpose if it's completely in Latin and the people can't understand it.
Right.
So putting it in their modern language so they could was the key. But that was the only contextual aspect of it, right? Everything else was old prayers from John Chrysostom and things of that nature from the patristics. So he's taking something old and he's applying it to the new without changing the old, just making it so that the people who are in the new can actually understand it. And I think that's where, liturgy serves the purpose of being somewhat contextual, but also ancient. And
Yeah.
helping us stay rooted in that is really how, as Christians, we can to some extent safeguard orthodoxy, even when we're, pulled against every wind of doctrine that goes in different ways.